Why was it necessary for Christ, the Redeemer, to die? Since death is the punishment for sin, Christ died willingly in our place to deliver us from the power and penalty of sin and bring us back to God. By His substitutionary atoning death, He alone redeems us from hell and gains for us forgiveness of sin, righteousness, and everlasting life. Why did Jesus have to die? The Apostle Paul deals with precisely that question in Romans chapter 3, verses 21 to 26. Having noted that all are sinners and fall short of the glory of God, whether Jew or Greek, whether of God's people or of the pagan lineages unattached to God's redemptive program, all suffer the same plight. We cannot do it ourselves. And yet, apart from the law and our sinfulness, God has intervened and the righteousness of God has been made manifest. God justifies the ungodly. Paul celebrates and revels in this, but he points out precisely how it is that God does justify the ungodly, that God does rescue Jew and Greek alike by faith alone. He points out that Jesus Christ has been put forward as a propitiation. It's a term that refers to the mercy seat upon the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies, that place where once a year the great high priest would enter and would pour out the blood of the Day of Atonement sacrifice upon Yom Kippur. That pouring of blood upon the very mercy seat was believed to be the occasion or event whereby God's wrath and His righteous anger was turned away from His people and upon that very sacrifice of life symbolized in the blood. Jesus, He is the true mercy seat. Jesus is the true one where God's wrath and His righteous anger has been poured down. He is the one who upon the cross suffered not just the greatest torture we could possibly throw at Him, but also a severe spiritual suffering that we could hardly imagine. That the one who'd forever known the divine smile, the one of whom God had screamed from the clouds, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." This one now knew the absence of God's fatherly care and presence. This one now himself screamed in agony, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus had become sin upon the cross. Jesus had assumed our sorrows. Jesus endured the guilt and its curse that was due us, the wrath that was for us. And so Paul speaks of Him as the true propitiation. But Paul goes on to speak of why this was necessary. Why did God demand someone endure this propitiating wrath? He points out that God had been forgiving in times past. The God of the Old Testament, far from common caricatures of a fastidious, sort of tightly wound father figure, a judge ready to intervene with anger and jealousy, the God of the Old Testament, far from that, was the kind of God who saved David and forgave Abraham, who dealt with misfits and screw-ups, who was keen to justify the ungodly at what seemed to be the simple cost of a few barnyard animals. No, the problem of the Old Testament isn't that God is too miserly in His love and His forgiveness. By all accounts, God is quite liberal in His redemption, His grace, His love. And in so doing, a thinking person might wonder, is God proving Himself to be unrighteous and unjust? It's lovely that the Davids and Abrahams of the world can be forgiven, and that's our only hope for each of us who are honest. But we wonder, must the rules be massaged? Must the laws be forgotten if the ungodly are to enter into the presence of a holy God? It's this problem and it's this question that the death of Jesus answers. In Romans 3:25 and 26, we're told twice that the Son of God came and served as this propitiatory sacrifice, not simply so that God could justify the ungodly, the ones who have faith in Christ, but that in doing so, God might be both the just and the justifier. That God would be righteous in declaring righteous those who, like you and I, like David and Abraham, seem at first glance to be so far from righteous. Someone did have to pay. Justice did have to be served. The laws and rules of God's law, God's covenant, God's very character, these can't be forgotten. These can't simply be massaged away or dialed back. Mercy does involve the fulfillment of justice, but it involves its fulfillment in the course of a substitute, a sacrifice, taking upon himself all that we rightly deserved. And so Jesus is a propitiation so that I don't have to be a casualty of my own history. Jesus is a sacrifice so that I don't have to live separated from God's fatherly care and merely in the presence of his jealous anger. Jesus does stand in the breach, and he does serve in the gap as a mediator, quelling God's propitiatory anger by enduring it fully, by entering into that terrible God-forsakenness, that genuine descent into the reality of hell, right there upon Golgotha's tree. Jesus did this not so that God could start now to forgive, to be lenient, to be gracious, to turn the other cheek, but rather so that his Father, who for centuries had been forgiving the wayward and justifying the ungodly, could be shown to be just in so doing, could be shown to be lawful in carrying out his generous designs. Jesus must die so that God may be both the just and the justifier, as we sing so often that wrath and mercy may meet and that they might kiss at the very foot of the cross.